Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video we are going to be taking a look at top Battlegrounds defenders. And this one is a very tricky video to make because in reality virtually every champion has some sort of offensive value, and therefore the requirement in order to make into this list specifically as a defender, I figured that would be 4 out of 5 or 9 out of 10 times the champion that gets drafted gets actually placed on a defense. Because realistically, again, I have used Korg on attack if I really have to against like Quicksilvers or something like that. I have used Sasquatch for several matchups. And, you know, they can pose relatively decent results as well. But there is no doubt in anybody's mind that those champions are primarily and foremostly looked at as defenders in Battlegrounds. Therefore, that is kind of the rule of thumb that I'm going for by here. But 9 out of 10 times the champion does end up getting placed on defense whenever he gets drafted. That is the type of champion that you will see here. Obviously, some of this is subjective, and you guys might question why some champions are excluded from this list and will be featured in the dual purpose champion list, and why some aren't. Because I do not have hard data to go by and have like an exact kind of like able to break down. And as always with everything in a game, you know, a lot of this is subjective personal opinion based on your preferences, based on your experience, based on everything else that you see personally in the game. And that is what I try to do with these lists. With these lists, I reflect my personal opinion with the current situation in the game, current game relevance and trends as I see them, you know, in Battlegrounds and everywhere else. And you might have a different experience or you might have a different opinion, and that is perfectly fine. We are all ultimately individuals. And these lists try to reflect my view of the game, not convince somebody that what I think is the only correct way to think about anything. Before we go any further, I do want to quickly remind you guys that I am organizing a $300 giveaway. It's super easy to enter. You basically just have to find me in-game, duel me in-game, grab a screenshot, submit that screenshot in the link that you will find in the video description. You have until July 2nd to enter. Results will be posted on July 4th, and we will have 3 winners who will receive $100 each. Right, all that being said, it's time to check out some top Battlegrounds defenders. And we are going to start with a champion that I think is going to increase in his presence in Battlegrounds very, very soon. But that is obviously just prediction, so to speak. But that is going to be a tumor. Number one, a tumor recently got his buff. And because of it, a lot of people are still kind of underestimating him, because now he does deal significantly more damage on defense than he used to do. And that, however, has become ever so more important because of the change to the scoring system, where the remaining health is worth more than the remaining time now, or how fast you do the fight. Champions that do almost inevitably cause damage to the opponents will effectively be better defenders than they have been so far. And that is also super important to note as a change in the game in the future, but also as something that affects these ranking type videos. Because every single time I praise somebody on defense, there's some jackass in the comment section saying like, you know, that champion is easy, just grab this one perfect counter and you're gonna destroy, you know. If I'm gonna say Rinter is a good defender, there's gonna be some smart asses like, oh, Archangel just destroys Rinter in 40 seconds. Or, you know, I think I'm gonna say Thing is a good defender. It's like, my crossbones destroys things in 35 seconds. Like, yeah, well, no shit, Sherlock. Every champion has counters. Every champion can be destroyed. We are talking about the ones that are either harder to counter or have fewer counters or have some sort of other unique capabilities that excel them from the crowd. So do not be one of those assholes. Do not go to the comment section and start crapping on a champion because, like, oh, Hulkling destroys, you know, Penny Parker. Therefore, Penny Parker's just don't do it. Nobody likes those guys. Anyways, it's fine. So here we are with Atum. Obviously, Atum does have counters, and most importantly, Atum is also a champion that can currently be nuked with something like, you know, Juggernaut, Tiger, or, you know, a bunch of other champions. But that, however, will lose its value, because if you happen to nuke down a tumor, let's say in 40 seconds with Juggernaut, but end up losing 15 to 20% health, now that will have a lot more value than potentially placing ring turn defense on your opponent, finishing that fight in 60 seconds with no health lost. So it is definitely going to be interesting, and we can't fully predict how good or bad all of these defenders will be with the new point scoring change. But at the moment, I feel like a Tuma is a very, very solid defender that people should not be sleeping on and realize that he is a problem and will be even bigger problem moving forwards. Right, let's move on to spot number 9. And with that, we are going to be picking up a Quicksilver. And here, I'm sure some people are going to say that, Quicksilver should be in dual purpose list. And again, that's why I say this is relatively subjective. But in my experience, virtually 9 times out of 10, Quicksilver gets drafted, he does get placed on defense. If Quicksilver does get used on offense, typically, from what I see, in most cases, doesn't really go that well. Or takes just forever and is nowhere near fast enough. Now, again, granted, might be considered a dual-purpose champion perhaps after the changes, when finishing a fight somewhat slower will not be as big of a deal. But as is, I definitely would class Quicksilver as a primarily and definitely a defensive champion. And Quicksilver is also one of those champions on defense that is not necessarily the best, quote-unquote, staller, because he doesn't have a massive health pool or some massive damage mitigation mechanics aside from, interactions with the equity mastery. But he is one of those champions that can quite easily trip up opponents, because, you always need to keep in mind his evade and where it is on the cooldown. It's not always so easy to do due to all of the other stuff going on in the fight. Then his special attacks are not the easiest to get away with. His combos can be wonky, and sometimes when you think you parry, you don't, and then he just, levels you in the face and gets a ton of withers, and not withers, but, well, terminal charge. How are those things called? Either way, yes, Quicksilver is a pain on the defense, but Quicksilver is also one of those champions that I think, as people get more familiar with, he's going to be less of a problem, because, as I said, he's not the tankiest, and it's just a matter of being able and confident fighting against Quicksilver. But at the moment, I definitely feel confident and comfortable placing him in spot number 9. Now, in spot number 8, we're going to be going back to we're going to be going to the Mystic class, which ultimately is, I think, overall probably the most capable class on defense. But we need to take a look at Mangog, because Mangog for the longest time was not considered to be a top tier defender. But with the release of 7-star, he absolutely exploded in terms of his importance, because it was a mixture of his increased attack and health values, preventing opponents from nuking down Mangog as fast, and therefore Mangog more often being able to go unstoppable and unblockable. Then it was a mixture of, obviously, stat focus and Mangog being able to have more block penetration, and that, I'm sure the challenger rating stuff there helps out as well. And Mangog almost seemed like a different breed of a defender as 7-star. If 6-star Mangog did not intimidate me on defense at all whatsoever, then tackling 7-star Mangogs is all of a sudden significantly more scary, again, with higher block penetration, with bigger health pools and everything else. And I think Mangog has definitely increased in popularity significantly since his release as 7-star, and the fact that he is perfectly capable defender unduped, because it doesn't really change too much for him on defense. And yeah, I think he definitely at the moment is deserving of the spot. We'll see how long and whether he keeps on top of it, but he definitely is a scary defender, and I think no questions asked in that department. And yeah, of course, yes, I know, Human Torch or Scorpion or something, something destroys him, but don't. Okay, moving on, spot number 7, another champion that initially didn't shine as much on defense, but has started doing so more so recently, and that is Killmonger. Like, Killmonger's presence in Battlegrounds got kind of destroyed early on by CGR, really, when everybody was heavily focusing on CGR, but it is undoubtable that CGR's presence in a lot of metas or a lot of decks has somewhat decreased, from my personal experience as well. I do use CGR in Battlegrounds, but not in every meta, not at all times, and Killmonger kind of swiftly snuck back in there, because Obviously, Killmonger presents quite a lot of dangers, and he's a very good mix of a champion that, even if opponent has a good counter, it's probably going to take some time to take him down, number one. Number two, he can make you mess up quite easily, by accidentally hitting his block or something. Then the fact that he gains extra power lets him spawn more special attacks, and then he has his reverb mechanic that you either need to play around perfectly or you will be taking damage, which again is going to be a more valuable thing going forward with the change in scoring system. And then just in general, he has his inbuilt critical resistance, provides him extra armor rating, and yeah, he is becoming kind of like a bigger problem in Battlegrounds, and especially in like last 2 seasons. I have lost more matches to Killmonger than I would like to admit. And on a personal level, I'm in that weird situation where I have a rank 3 6-star Killmonger and a 7-star Killmonger, and so I end up pretty much not using Killmonger myself in both cases because I don't want rank 4 my 6-star, but unduped Killmonger is nowhere near as dangerous. So uh, I'm gonna need to figure something out there because this guy definitely is, in my opinion, becoming more valuable defender and will continue to do so because of the change to the scoring system. So I might finally need to pull the plug and take him to rank 4 myself until I dupe my 7-star, which, might not happen for a very, very long time. But definitely very solid defender with very few kind of like amazing, amazing counters. And there are a lot of champions that typically get used in Battlegrounds that don't deal with Killmonger particularly well. And in most cases, champions going up against Killmonger still come out having taken some amount of chip damage, which again is going to be more and more important. So, Killmonger being spot number 7. So, who goes to spot number 6? And spot number 6 is kind of one of those very unfair moments. I'm giving it to Jessica Jones. And Jessica Jones, in some metas, is borderline unbeatable defender, like when we had those metas that places extra debuffs on defender, which basically lets her supercharge herself quickly. But even in an average meta, Jessica Jones is definitely a problem and requires a good counter. Because you typically fighting against Jessica, you are kind of on a timer. That's even different from obviously the fight duration. And you can either take down Jessica Jones well and fast, but if she gets to the point where she goes unstoppable and gains all the resistances when either you or her uses a special attack, then the fights often go very downhill. I can't explain how many fights I have seen, whether in tournaments or matches, or I have had it myself, where, the first 70% of Jessica's health pool goes pretty much perfect, and you think you're going to be in the clear and you're going to have the dub, and then all of a sudden everything just snowballs. She goes unstoppable, you need to back off, you get cornered, and she just starts wailing at you, and then you end up getting KO'd. And that's kind of the thing with Jessica. She definitely is one of those champions that needs to be at least rank 4, I would say, as a defender. But yeah, when she gets her charges, when she starts going unstoppable and blockable, then there's not too much you can do aside from having like a perfect counter, like Valkyrie, for instance, completely ignoring the unstoppable is perfectly fine counter, or something like Shang-Chi that has guaranteed crits and access to slow. So she does have very, very good counters like every other champion in the game. But unless you have those very great counters, in many instances, you're just absolutely screwed up the wazoo. Like, when she starts going off at you, yeah, you end up getting in the corner and just smacked. And definitely the scary champion to take on defense. Like, if I see rank 5 Jessica Jones, I pretty much never want any smoke of that. Now, moving on to spot number 5. And in spot number 5, I am going to be putting in a Mephisto, because Mephisto routinely can break or make your day as a defender. And here is the harsh reality of Mephisto. He is a very big gamble to draft if Human Torch and Scorpion pretty much exist in a game. As in, like, if they are in the decks and if they are allowed and if they're not banned. Because if you catch your opponent with their pants down using a Mephisto, you pretty much all but guaranteed have a round. Especially if your Mephisto is high sig. Like, if your opponent does not have an appropriate Incinerate immune counter, you're probably gonna get that round. But if they do, then Scorpion and especially Human Torch just tear through him, and Mephisto turns pretty much completely useless. But that aside, as I said, most champions here have weakness to like specific champions, and there are champions that can nuke through down them very, very quickly. Just that it's especially kind of exaggerated with Mephisto. As far as I can tell, you're either gonna have like a perfect defender that your opponent basically will have to throw around, or he's gonna struggle. And there are a lot of champions that can kind of take Mephisto, but then none of them are particularly fast, or they will end up taking some damage. Like, if you need be, then in many instances, for instance, you can use Juggernaut against Mephisto. It's doable, it has been done, or like, Hulk, even though, Hulk's probably gonna take some damage and so forth. But yeah, he definitely has a couple champions that completely dominate this guy. Then there's a bunch of champions that can kind of deal with him, but it normally is not well enough. And then there's a ton of champions who just get absolutely wrecked by Mephisto. And drafting Mephisto is always, yeah, as I said, kind of a bit of a gamble, similar to drafting Domino, but Domino at least has offensive uses as well. Because, you draft Domino, next round opponent gets Nimrod, you're like, shucks. You draft Mephisto, and next time around opponent gets Human Torch, you're like, well, that was a waste. Okay. So yeah, that's why I'm putting in Mephisto in the middle of this list. He's definitely a phenomenal defender and can ruin people's days. But he also can ruin your day when you draft. Right, but again, similar thing goes to the most champions. But that is why we need to talk about spot number 4, which I'm going to be putting in Nick Fury. And the funny thing is, Nick Fury is definitely also a capable attacker if you run deep wounds. And most people in Battlegrounds don't. Therefore, I was thinking about this, should Nick Fury be included in the dual purpose champion list? I almost did it, but then I realized that no, 9 times out of 10, when Nick Fury is drafted, he does end up getting placed on defense, and only people who ever use him offensively are the ones that run deep wounds. And even then, for instance, I often run 4 points in deep wounds in my Battlegrounds mastery setups, and even then, 9 times out of 10, I will still place Nick Fury on defense, just to make sure that he's a viable attacker. You put the deep wounds on him, so, I can use that Uno card. And a lot of people will start now, especially now with the release of Danny Moonstar, they have started talking about how Nick Fury might not be worth it anymore, and there's like a new champion that counter him. And I disagree with it, because, we have had nuke champions for all the defenders, including Nick Fury. Nick Fury's second life got completely countered by Penny Parker, who is very capable attacker in her own right. Toad can bypass Nick Fury. And even though those are the champions that shut off his second life, we still had champions that did Nick Fury faster anyways, like, Juggernaut or Sunspot and Massacre can do Nick Fury in like 45 to 50 seconds. But that has always been one of the kind of like appeals of Nick Fury as a defender. But even if an opponent has a perfect counter, he still has that extra health pool. There's still things that can go wrong, and he still is, at the very least, solid. Who knows how it will change with Nick Fury, but I do not expect the existence of Danny completely, overshadow him as defender. Because, yeah, we have had Toad, had Penny Parker, and we still have, absolute nukes that still can get through Nick Fury. But fact of the matter is that in these nuke metas, Nick Fury is one of the kind of like bigger health pools to get through. And he can mess you up if he throws a special attack at the wrong moment, or, just clenches up for a bit. Nick Fury, I swear, has some of the most random AI at times. But I do think that in general, Nick Fury is one of those core Battleground defenders. For sure. And I think a lot of people forget how much more dangerous Nick Fury can become in some of the harder metas. Because Nick Fury is a champion that's, kind of relatively risky to play around in an arena-like environment, where you obviously have to keep your eye on opponent's charges, whether he will throw or will not throw at level 1 and stuff like that. But when you add nodes on top of it, Nick Fury's difficulty level often escalates quite dramatically. Like we had those several nodes with like Power Snack and Nick Fury gaining the block penetration charges, and then God forbid he ever throws a level 1, your block damage just goes through the roof pretty much immediately. So yeah, Nick Fury overall I think deserves his spot number 4. Spot number 3 I will be giving to The Thing. And The Thing is also like similar champion in case like most of these, where obviously Thing very, very rarely gets used defensively. And yes, as all champions, he does have counters that will run through him. But again, that goes with pretty much everything in a game. And even if opponents have a very good counter to Thing, more often than not, he will still stretch that fight out better than, Mangog or Mephisto or a bunch of other champions. But the problem obviously always is with Thing when there is no perfect counter. It's almost all but guaranteed a timeout. And Thing is also one of those champions that can become an incredible problematic champion with addition of some extra nodes, because it's not as easy to play around the Thing always anyways, making sure that he has at least bar of power whenever he gets the 15 charges, or sometimes when you try to hit his block and he accidentally drops it, you get hit in the face, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, the Thing definitely has proved himself to be one of the Battlegrounds staple defenders. And I think this is also a very important thing to mention. Even though I do value all of these defenders extremely highly in their own right, I do not run, let's say, 10 designated defenders in all of the metas myself personally. I typically have, relatively modest amount of offensive only champions, and then I have a relatively modest amount of defensive only champions, and vast majority of my deck is more often filled with dual purpose champions that perform offensively and defensively. So, full disclosure, I will use all of these champions on defense at times, but pretty much never all in the same meta or all together. And yeah, there are some metas where I do not use Thing, for instance. But then again, there are some metas where Thing is an absolute menace. And when he works, he's one of the most potent defenders to draft. That said, we need to go on spot number 2. And everything that I just said about Thing pretty much gets discounted by these top 2 champions that are defensive only. And I use them virtually in all of the metas. I don't remember many, if any, metas where I have not had my rank 4 Sasquatch in my deck, because no matter the nodes, no matter what's running kind of like around, Sasquatch does have one of the biggest health pools in the game, and he does have access to MD, and he does have access to, more damage mitigation mechanics. So I think all of the previous defenders, I have left them out of my decks at some point. I think Sasquatch and Korg, oh, whoops, I kind of gave away top spot. But Sasquatch is one of those champions that is pretty much always in my deck, regardless of what meta, what's going to happen, whether, there is any chance at all that I could possibly use Sasquatch on offense or not. I always put in Sasquatch on defense. And yeah, again, obviously there are like Spider Hams and Human Torches and Scorpions that can get through. But again, that goes to virtually every champion. But overall, Sasquatch just has pretty much statistically the best chance of stalling opponents, at the very least, somewhat. And that's why I think it's quite important. So obviously, Sasquatch does have access to regen that, if opponents are not able to deal with, then probably will cause them a timeout. He can trip opponents in his Wrath of Tanrak, randomly immediately going, stun immune, or being unstoppable and being super aggressive and cornering them, or getting pushed to level 3 due to MD. Opponent accidentally blocks his level 1, they can get stunned and it gets smacked in the face. But realistically, Sasquatch is just a big, blubbery shield of meat on defense. And he does his job about as well as you can expect from him. And then, spot number 1, I think obviously goes to Korg. I think Korg is the single most valuable defensive champion in Battlegrounds. because every single meta, Korg is always there. And even in arena-like environments, he's still very tough to deal with. And the best players in the world have gotten very, very good at fighting Korg. As in, like, they can take on Korg with random champions that, most people wouldn't try. Like, they use Hercules against Korg, they use Massacre against Korg, who do not have any abilities that inherently are, very helpful against Korg. Even then, in between his very respectable health pool, in between damage mitigation that he gains from his rock stacks and his debuff shrug off abilities, and in between his inbuilt critical resistance and his immunities, he's one of those champions that pretty much never goes down very, very quickly. Like, opponent can have a perfect counter to Korg, but statistically, Korg always holds out longer than any other champion with a perfect counter. What I mean for is, like, if you're gonna have Korg, let's say Thing, an opponent has Valkyrie against the Thing, and somebody else has like perfect counter for Korg, the Thing is gonna go down quicker. The same thing with Mephisto, the same thing with Jessica Jones, the same thing with Nick Fury, same thing with Sasquatch. If one has Scorpion or Torch, Sasquatch is gonna go down quicker than Korg, and that's kind of like the most important thing. Korg not only has a very solid chance to trip opponent up, or they might end up hitting in his rock stacks by accident and take some damage, or they might get caught by his unstoppable or unblockable or level 1 or something else. There are plenty of these, error moments or factors in the fight. But Korg also has very few, if any, champions that will take him down like under 40 seconds on equal rank. And you could kind of say Nick Fury the same thing. Pretty much nothing will take down Nick Fury in like under 40 or 50 seconds. But the thing with Nick Fury is there are way more champions that you can just use generally against him, and there are less champions that you can use against Korg to even attempt something like that. And yeah, therefore, I think overall Korg is the most important defender to have for Battlegrounds, period. If there's anything else in this list, you don't need to kind of like completely obsess over having a ranked up Thing or a ranked up Sasquatch or a ranked up Killmonger for BG defense. You'll do fine if some of those champions are missing, as long as you have some other good defenders. But Korg is definitely one of those champions where you really, really want to hunt him down, stick him up, and rank him up and put him in your deck, because he has been a solid defense in every single meta. So that's what I think. I think Korg is the best defensive champ. And again, now, just to reveal the list here, as we can see, Korg, Sasquatch, Thing, Nick Fury, Mephisto, Jessica Jones, Killmonger, MCOC, Quicksilver, and a tumor. And I know a lot of people will ask specifically again about like Penny, Domino, and Rintra, because those are kind of like the more powerful defenders as well, especially Domino and Rintra. A lot of people definitely notice that, Domino and Rintra are not here. But rest assured, I will be using both Domino and Rintra as dual purpose champions, because especially in case with Domino, you end up using her offensively a lot. And part of that has to do with how effectively some of the tech champions counter her. At least I know for a fact that, about in a third of instances when I drop my Domino, I end up doing something with Domino on attack, because she's more capable attacker than most people would give her credit for. And same thing with Rintra, maybe a bit less so, but I see a Rintra used on offense a ton as well, and nobody really disputes the fact that Rintra is a very capable offensive champion also, especially if it's not a complete nuke Fiesta meta. So anyways, that is it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will catch you guys soon. Bye. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about